So at this time, counsel will be prepared to proceed with their closing arguments. It is 11:05 a.m.
Jury, as I stated in my opening, we are here to hold this defendant, Erica Stefanko, accountable for the actions she chose to take on June 20th through June 21st, 2012. We are here to hold her responsible for what she chose to do that day. Now, whether you all hold her responsible as the principal or as the accomplice, it all leads to the same place. All roads lead to Erica Stefanko being guilty of the crimes charged in the indictment. The evidence and testimony has proved that beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence and testimony have proved that Erica Stefanko, that Chad Cobb could not have committed the murder of Ashley Biggs by himself. And again, we are not saying Chad Cobb is not guilty. He absolutely is guilty. That's why he is doing life without parole. He is paying for his part. We want you to hold Erica Stefanko accountable for the part she played in the murder of Ashley Biggs. Complicity. The judge went over the complicity instructions. I talked about it in opening, and I'm going to touch on it again here because it is very important. It is very important that as you listen to the testimony and evidence that has been put forth to show that she's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, you keep this legal concept in mind, that she did aid or abet, she helped, she assisted, she conspired with Chad in committing the murder of Ashley Biggs. You need to keep the concept that a person who knowingly does those things, who knowingly helps and aids and encourages and associates herself with another, either with the intent of committing a crime or in the actual commission of a crime, is regarded as if she is the chief person, the principal offender, as if she committed the act herself. You heard the judge talk about when two or more persons have a common purpose to commit a crime and one does one part and a second performs another, they are equally as guilty. Now that's important, and we even talked about it in jury selection. Prosecutor LaFrenzy talked about the robbery example. If you all remember the robbery example where an individual may have purchased a gun, an individual may have secured the automobile, purchased a face mask, drove someone else to a bank. That someone else gets out of the automobile with the mask on, with the gun the other person purchased, goes into the bank, robs the bank, a murder is committed in the process, runs back out, cash in hand, mask on that was purchased for him, and a gun. Gets in the car, they leave. The getaway driver is just as responsible for what happened in that bank as the individual who went in there and robbed the bank and who went in there and committed the murder. And in jury selection, you all say that you understood that concept. No one said they had a problem with that concept. And he went on to say, in those type of cases, would you expect any forensic evidence of the person in the car to be in the bank? No. And you all understood that and was fine with that. In this case, there was no forensic evidence. We did not put forth that, if you notice. killed Erica Stefanko at 647 West Turkeyville Lake Road. Why? Because it was Chad who did that part. And I'm sure the defense will harp on, well, there's no physical evidence. But common sense and reason tells you why there's no forensic evidence. Because that wasn't her part. But evidence and testimony showed that she did take part from beginning, middle, and end. I've been talking about the testimony and evidence that proved Erica Stefanko guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And keep in mind what reasonable doubt is. It's when you're firmly convinced of the truth of the charge. It's based on your common sense and reason, what you use in your everyday decisions when you make important decisions. It's reached in courtrooms across the country all the time, every day. Now, what evidence and testimony did the state put forth to show that this defendant, Erica Stefanko, is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Well, she knew what was going to happen. That was their plan. That was their purpose in going there that night. She drove Chad to the crime scene. She knew why it was going to happen. It was that custody battle. It was retaliation. She made the call to Domino's that lured Ashley Biggs to her death. She followed Chad to the cornfield. She waited at that cornfield for him to dump Ashley's body and the car in the cornfield. She drove Chad home to shower away the evidence. Went back to the initial crime scene with him to clean up the evidence, or to try to clean up the evidence, and hid with Chad at his grandparents' house, the Tallmans, in the back of that detached garage until they were, and that's where they actually were caught by the police. Now, I talked about she knew what was going to happen. How do you all know? What did the state put forth to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she knew what was going to happen, that that was their plan? Well, several things. Several things. One, her own words. There is a recorded conversation that this defendant had with Cindy Cobb at Cindy Cobb's house. Now keep in mind, this was a secretly recorded conversation with someone she had conversations with multiple times, all the time. There is no reason for this defendant to think she was being recorded. And when you listen to it, and please listen to it, she speaks freely. There's a banter back and forth with the both of them. Now it may be said, oh, somehow every conversation that the state brings up, the defendant is now a raging alcoholic. Listen to the conversation. Listen to the tone and the flow and the dialogue of the conversation. You'll hear her voice. You will not hear any slurred words. You'll hear the conversation where each question was asked accordingly. There's no question asked about one thing, such as, how tall are you? And she gives an answer about an animal. No, the conversation flowed accordingly, and you can tell people's demeanor in the conversation. So please pay attention. Those are the defendant's, Erica Stefanko's, own words regarding what happened that night. Also, you have the backpack with the items in it. Those items you can see in this PowerPoint, and you can see on the table. When they went out to that location, and these items we talked about, these items either had stains, as Soraya put it, which were blood, or were used on Ashley Biggs. You have zip ties. These aren't little zip ties. You have duct tape. You have a electrical restraint device, as Dr. Kohler calls it, a taser. Here's a mask. You have gloves with knuckles, the hardened knuckles. You have a sheath knife you have camo face paint. These are all the things. And the backpack that were either used or were present that night. That is a kidnapper's killer kit right there. What is the purpose of having all of those items? In addition to the items that I just showed you, the Domino's pizza order, the nature of the call, that shows that they had a plan as well. And they knew what was going to happen. And I say they together knew what was going to happen. Why? Because the defendant did her part. She placed an order to a closed business and said, come to the back door. Why the back door? Look at the pictures. There's trees. There's darkness. It's pitch black back there. That goes to show her mindset, what was going on in the planning and the discussion. But again, remember, it's her words that do it.
I've actually got a good picture, which I still gotta do. Which I still have to do pictures. And then it goes into, she says that you guys are allowed to bring up whoever you all want. And I have to give him all his tools immediately, or he's going to, how do you phrase it? I don't know how my involvement with Ashley.
In addition to that, after it was over, Chad used his knowledge about Erica, the defendant's involvement, her involvement before the planning, during, and after, to hold over her head, as she used the kids to hold over his. As she stated in here, which you just heard, and I have to give him all his tools immediately, or he is going to, how did he phrase it? Tell them more about my involvement with Ashley.
And in fairness, like, some of the stuff that was going on under his roof, like, this is the part that really gets me, that I don't, it's sort of like the same way he's like, okay, well, you know, things like, well, I'm here because of you, and it's all your fault. And I'm like, bullshit. But how are we gonna say so? Like, I get that if everything had been told exactly as it happened, then we both have us right now. I don't disagree with that. That's totally the truth. But for him to say that, you know, oh, I was in there because you said more for you. He came up with how to do it. He executed almost all of it. The part that he executed went totally awry. He was talking about, I didn't really feel like he stayed on the phone. I didn't want to make a problem for him or make him angry for his appeal. But he was so like, he would get this look on his face and be like, yeah, I'm gonna, if I get this go through and I can do this, I'm gonna keep her soul and trophy.
That shows that they talked about it. They knew what was going to happen there. That was their purpose when they got there, to murder Ashley. She says if everything had been told exactly as it happened, then we'd both be in prison right now. I don't disagree with that. That's totally the truth. She also talks about he came up with how to do it. He executed almost all of it. That's important. Almost all of it. She acknowledges that she executed some. The part that he executed went totally awry. Then she says, yeah, if this goes through and I can do this, I'm going to keep her skull as a trophy. She's saying that's what they talked about prior to this happening. That goes to show she knew what was going to happen. They knew what was going to happen. They had a plan, and that was their purpose for going there. What in the Sam here? The principal. Okay. Thank you.
That's why I was like, okay, I was like, 'cause the first thought that went through my head is immediately I'm like, well, if this is what's gonna happen and I'm gonna lose the kids and I'm going to jail and this is what's gonna happen, because to me it was like one of two things: either he's bluffing and he really never really do that, or he plans to do it anyway. That was the thing, is the fact that he put it there instead of just having a normal conversation with me saying, you know, I'm not going to put it on with you yet, I'm going to do that. Instead of just having a normal conversation and saying, look, I'm not ready for this. I don't want to be your enemy. I want to work with you with the kids. And I mean, I can't necessarily expect him to be able to articulate that, given his state of mind. But I mean, the way he went about it, unless his real intention is actually to throw me in prison in the fact he's, I need to make some arrangements to be able to spend with these kids, because every single one of them is going to get adopted out except for Lily, because obviously she's got somewhere to go. And like, I gave you guys the account. But what's going to happen with Faith and what's going to happen with Xander? I mean,
In this excerpt, she talks about, is that his real intention to throw me in prison? To throw her in prison for what? For her execution with Chad of the murder of Ashley, for her part she did. And you also heard her talk about the children. Again, well, they're going to get adopted out. That was the theme throughout the trial. She's using that to keep Chad from talking. Talking about what? Again, it's her involvement from beginning to middle to end.
anyway, from my perspective, I can't, like I said, I can't have him. And if it really is his intention at some point to put me in prison, I'd like to know about it, because I have some arrangements to make on my own about prison. I'm not going to have someone else raise my kids, and just stand by and know she's going to be in prison for 15 years or how long it's going to be. You know, makes me feel like they need to take out like insurance policy, to be totally honest with you. Because you know, like, I know he's talked about, oh, we do X, Y, Z. Well, he's a lot tougher than I am. And, you know, you get
Judge, I'm going to
this,
object
what he
to
needs to, but I'm not doing that.
Ms. Stefanko's photo being shown on the screens while this video or the audio is being played.
Okay. Overruled.
Anyway, from my perspective, I can't, like I said, I can't have him. And if it really is his intention at some point to put me in prison, I'd like to know about it, because I have some arrangements to make on my own about prison. I'm not going to have someone else raise my kids, and just stand by and know she's going to be in prison for 15 years or how long it's going to be. You know, makes me feel like they need to take out like insurance policy, to be totally honest with you. Because you know, like, I know he's talked about, oh,
details, that passage details, her conversation details, they talked about it. I threw the ball back in his court. If this is too risky, we would not have done it. She talks about, those were not my exact words, that night. The night they were talking about is the night Ashley Biggs died. Ashley Biggs was murdered. She said because we had already been over that so many times. She's talking about the purpose, the reason why they were there, the plan. But as she stated, she's seen him get away with so much crazy stuff that she thought he and they could get away with anything.
He had gone, if what was supposed to happen that night had happened, then it was, he had a perfect plan, but it didn't go the way it was supposed to go at all. And why that is, I don't know, because he told it to me 2 different ways. It doesn't matter now. Yeah. But yeah, again, that's why, I mean, I was, you know, you can't like really function everyday life if you're looking over your shoulder every second. Every time I hear a siren, I think they're coming for me. And that's something that I'm gonna live with, but I don't need him to contribute to it. And if his goal is really to do that, then I need to know it. If his goal is really to do what he needs to do for himself without sacrificing everyone else, because whether he, regardless of how he feels about me, and I'm not trying to say this in a manipulative kind of a way. It's just the fact of the matter. Kids and I are part and parcel. And unless you guys think you have some way that you can take care of them, for him to see the kids, I have to still not be in prison.
At the beginning of that passage is when she said, if he had got what that was supposed to happen that night, happened, then it was, he had the perfect plan, but it didn't go the way it was supposed to go at all. She talks about it. And she also talks about she can't live that way. Let's talk about that for a minute, that she can't live this way. Looking over her shoulder, the ultimatums, hearing sirens, possibly going to jail. Why is she so paranoid, or why is she so scared of Chad and his ultimatums, or why does she comply? Chad is in prison doing life without parole. He has no assets, he has no money. She knows that because she was part and parcel of his business dissolving and selling off his assets. So what does he have? How is he able to hold something over her head? You know what Chad has? He has information. He has knowledge. And knowledge is power. He has the information and the knowledge of what and how Erica Stefanko, the defendant, played a part in Ashley Biggs' death the night of June 20th through the 21st. That's what he has. And that knowledge and information is more valuable or more important than any given person he could have out here or any amount of money. And that's why she keeps saying she can't live like that with sirens. Every time she hears a siren, she thinks they're coming for her. Now, how else did the defendant aid, abet, or assist Chad that night? Well, she drove Chad to the scene. How do we know? She told Mary Brinkman. Mary Brinkman testified. You saw Mary Brinkman testify. Mary Brinkman testified about that dinner they had. And Erica admitted that she dropped Chad off at 647 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road. Mary Brinkman also stated that she has no ill will towards Erica Stefanko, that it was Erica Stefanko that cut off contact with her because she was losing control over the kids when Mary Brinkman wanted some kind of legal action with the kids through CSB. The defendant's statements about having a conversation with Chad under the tree, and Chad's testimony about under the tree where they stood and she went back to the SUV. The defendant came back, and the next time she went back is when she made the call. Physics, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Chad cannot drive 2 cars at the same time. We know Chad drove Ashley Biggs' car from the murder scene. He had to have been dropped off there. Detective Hitchings testified and other officers. They searched that area. They looked up the cars that Chad Cobb owned. None was found there. You heard Matt Travis from the pizza place. After she was gone a short amount of time, he went looking for her and then called the Summit County Sheriffs. No other of Chad's cops were around. No cars. He can only drive one car at a time. Also, the phone that was used to make the phone call to lure Ashley Biggs to her death pinged off a tower in New Franklin. You heard the records custodian from Verizon and Detective Hitchings talk about that. The records custodian stated if there's a tower that's not full to capacity, which would not have been in a place like New Franklin, it's not dark that time of night, it would have pinged off of the closest tower. It's not going 13 or so more miles to another county to a tower there when there's towers in the vicinity. And make no doubt about it, that phone pinged off a tower in New Franklin in Summit County, not in Rittman in Wayne County. Those are her words, talking about under the tree. That places her at the scene that night along with the other evidence and testimony you heard. That, beyond a reasonable doubt, places her there. That places her there driving Chad there. Now, how else did the defendant, Erica Stefanko, assist, aid, encourage, abet Chad? Well, she is the one who placed the call to Domino's luring Ashley Biggs to her death. How do we know that? Again, her own statements acknowledging she made the phone call to Cindy Cobb. You have Chad's testimony that she placed that call. You have GC's testimony that she heard the defendant place that call. GC remembered being in the back of an automobile, it being pitch black dark out. Look at the pictures of the crime scene. It is pitch black dark out there. The minutes purchased at Walmart. You heard testimony and seen pictures of Chad Cobb, Cindy Stefanko, and the children at Walmart. Those minutes purchased 2 days before, 15-minute phone cards. You heard testimony that a 15-minute phone card was placed on the phone the night of the murder. Again, the phone records tower placing the phone in New Franklin. And the phone call itself, again, to a closed business, to the back of that business, using a fake name. That goes into the plan and knowing what was going to happen and the purpose as well. Important. That passage right there speaks volumes. Cindy Cobb tells her at one time, you told me face to face that you made the phone call and you set the meeting up. That you had told me, the defendant, and there's no lie in that. That is her first response, and there is no lie in that. She goes on and say, I did it. It wasn't like He was forcing me. It wasn't like he held a gun to my head. Now, I talked about the defendant following Chad to the cornfield and waiting on him to dump the body, the car, in the cornfield. This is another way the defendant assisted, aided, abetted Chad Cobb. She didn't have to. That is in a whole different county. She had to be somewhere close to follow him out, or, as Chad stated, when he called her back to the scene, was there and literally pulled out right behind him. She could have abandoned this anytime she wanted to, but she did not. She followed him from Summit County to Wayne County to that cornfield. And again, Chad cannot drive two cars at one time. Now, that cornfield, ladies and gentlemen, you see on the screen where she would have parked. We talked about that bridge. And you see that cornfield where near the edge, where I am pointing now, oh, you all can't see. The right top part of the screen in that cornfield is where the car would have been found. Chad had to walk through that cornfield, that dirt on the ground in that cornfield, and those are Chad Cobb's boots. His boots would have been dirty. This is the navigator. You look at the driver's side on the floor, it's the normal wear and tear of the dirt, the regular dirt over time. You look at the passenger side, you look back at his boots, and look at the passenger side, that is fresh dirt from when Chad walked through that cornfield and got in that car. And he got in on the passenger side because it was the defendant, Erica Stefanko, driving. Please look at all the evidence and exhibits when you get back to deliberate. Do not overlook anything. Do not take for granted anything. Now, the defendant drove Chad home to shower away the evidence. How do we know this? How did the state prove this beyond a reasonable doubt? Chad testified. He got back in the car, whether he washed away the camo face paint, the dirt that would have been on his body from walking through the cornfield, the dried blood that may have been on his body from Ashley. He was driven home by the defendant to wash off and wash away the remnants of that murder that night. Chad testified when he got home, he stopped at his garage that was attached to his house and took off his clothes. You heard testimony that those clothes were found on a makeshift table by a burned pit. Chad did not put them there. Now, how else, this is after the fact, how else did the defendant aid, abet, or assist? They did this together. They were going to go back to the scene to clean up. Now, keep in mind, she did not have to go back out there with him, but she did, with 4 kids in tow. Now, they wanted to make sure that the scene, which she would have come back to when Chad called her, she remembers, you see the scene? That the business or individuals coming the next day did not find that scene. So what did they do? They gathered up the kids. They gathered up industrial grade, multiple kinds of industrial grade cleaning supplies with a brush. Now, there's been testimony. Chad had a cable business. That is true. And any given one of these he may have been able to use in the Cobb Cable Company. But they are all together in a crate. They're not in his work van or work truck, and you saw that at his house. They're not in his personal pickup truck, but they're in the Lincoln Navigator where you see car seats and kids are. And there's no other of his supplies or work stuff in that car, just the cleaning supplies and brush. Why? Because they put them in there. Because they had the same purpose and plan and scheme to go back and clean up that crime scene. They both hid behind the garage at his grandmother's, the Tallmans, at Rex Lake Road. There was plenty of parking. They could have parked anywhere, but they chose to drive behind that detached garage, both of them together, because it's a wooded, dark area. They were trying to evade the police. They were trying to evade capture, and that shows their consciousness of guilt. All of this because of a custody battle, retaliation. All of this because of the dislike for Ashley Biggs and her gaining custody of GC. Because of time, I want to make sure I go over the indictment because it is very, very important. And I'm going to start with kidnapping. And the judge went over by force, threat, or deception. Force, threat, or deception. Remove Ashley Biggs from the place where she was found or restrain her liberty for the purpose of facilitating the commission of a felony. Well, what have the state put forth beyond a reasonable doubt for these elements? Force, threat, or deception. Force or deception. Deception to remove Ashley from the place where she was found was that phone call the defendant made to lure her to the back of 647 West Turkeyfoot Lake Road. That deceptive phone call, that was the deception to get her there. Now, force to restrain her liberty. And this is or. I'm just saying how we prove all of it. Force is the taser that you can see on that table. And if you remember Dr. Kohler and BCI agent Soraya testified that when those barbs hit you, your muscles will stiffen up and you will drop. Dr. Kohler actually described it in her autopsy report as an electrical restraint. It was referred to that multiple times. That is the force that was used to restrain Ashley Biggs' liberty for the purpose of committing or facilitating the commission of a felony. And that was either to beat Ashley Biggs, that zip tie around her neck, the beating, the felonious assault, the murder that was committed, the taking of her car since they knew they were going to, that was going to happen, and take her car to the cornfield, the aggravated robbery, the commission of any of those felonies. So they restrained her liberty, or by deception removed her from where she was for the purpose of facilitating a felony. Okay? Now, I talked about the taser type device. The top two photos are the taser doors. And you have these photos that was found on the scene at the murder scene. The bottom one with the number 4 placard, that was the taser cartridge that those doors came off of. And that was found under Ashley Biggs' body in the back of the car. The last one, the string, that is the barb. That's a barb. That is what would have been planted in Ashley Biggs' back. And then read the Dr. Kohler's autopsy protocol. She was tased in the back. In the back. How do you get tased in the back if you're not trying to leave? She was tased in the back, and that would have been the barb. That was used to restrain her liberty. The aggravated robbery. The deadly weapon or attempting to inflict serious physical harm, that's the beating. The deadly weapon is the taser that could be used, and they did use it as a deadly weapon. And the aggravated robbery is stealing her car. They took her car. Now, those are the predicate offenses, and I wanted to go over those first before we get to the aggravated murder. Now, one murder you'll see is prior calculation and design. I went over purposefully about how they talked about and she knew what was going to happen in the prior calculation and design. She used the word plan out of her own mouth. Caused the death of Ashley Biggs. Based on her testimony, Chad's testimony, her recorded statements, what was brought to the scene and used, the nature of the phone call all shows the prior calculation design. She knew what was going to happen, and that was their plan. I want to go over the next aggravated murder, because that's more of the felony murder. and that they caused her death while attempting to commit or fleeing after committing a felony. So if you find that they caused her death while committing or attempting to commit the kidnapping or aggravated robbery, then we've proved beyond a reasonable doubt this aggravated murder. I went over kidnapping and aggravated robbery. So if they did both of those and caused her death while doing that, that is aggravated robbery, and the state has proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. The next one is murder, that was their purpose. They purposely caused the death of Ashley Biggs. That is what they went there for, and I will not rehash the reasons, the phone call, things of that nature. I do want to differentiate that from the next murder. This is felony murder. There's no purpose in this one. If you see you don't have an element of purpose, is that one, they did cause the death of Ashley Biggs, and it was as a proximate result of them committing or attempting to commit a felony. So as a proximate result of them committing or attempting to commit a felony, they caused her death. And that's important that you don't see the word purpose in this murder. And that's the felony murder you will have on your on your verdict form. That's the felony murder. So if you find that as a proximate result of them trying to commit a felonious assault, and you heard Dr. Kohler state that the beating before the zip tie was grave injury in her, and you have the disc from her testimony. You have where the bruise, the deep bruising, the serious physical harm the beating caused itself. So if you find that it was a felonious assault or the kidnapping, again, the kidnapping or the aggravated robbery, while the defendant and Chad Cobb committed those crimes, and as a proximate result, not their purpose, but as a proximate result, Ashley Biggs died, then that is murder. That is very important, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Now, as I stated in the beginning, Ashley Biggs was in for a Erica Stefanko was in for a penny. Erica Stefanko was in for a pound. She committed this murder with Chad Cobb. She was there with him every step of the way. From the beginning, the planning. From the middle, the execution. And the end, the potential cover-up. Once you all go back and listen to and look over the evidence and testimony, the state is confident that you will find the defendant, Erica Stefanko, guilty of all the crimes charged in the indictment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Easter. Desiree, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. I will just note for the record that it's 10 till 12.